Okay, I've decided I'm going to post chapter 5, but because I have lost about 5 subscribers since I started posting my story, and it seems the interest has tapered off quite a bit. I believe this will be my last chapter that I will post, at least in video form, unless people request it. I don't want to lose all my subscribers, but it does kind of make me concerned that the fact that the interest has tapered off, it's not a good sign. So anyway, trying to think positive thoughts. Here is chapter 5. I wanted to add before I read chapter 5 that I read about half of this and realized that half of it had not been typed yet into the computer. This is actually a chapter that was pages. It was in page form, which is a much older draft than what I was able to salvage from floppy disk. So it forced me to have to write today. I had to rewrite the second half of chapter 5 because it wasn't what I wanted. So anyway, it's a little rough. It's a rewrite of an earlier version. But anyway, here it is. Chapter 5. Avalar grimaced and shrugged her pack higher on her aching shoulders. With her face turned westward, she abandoned the open river in favor of the trees, hurrying with long strides over a meadow dusted with snow. The late fall cloveleaf crunched as she walked, their ice-bitten petals crinkled brown. A cry reached her, like a wounded raka in a snare. Avalar clenched the hilt of her sword, her habit since entering Thalos, homeland of the wizard Velar who had once enslaved her people. That was long ago, she reminded herself. That human is dead. She froze as the voice cried again. It came from the bend in the river behind her, as if the turbulent water loathed to be left alone. Sails, she muttered. Something's hurt. Instincts called to her heart, racial memories not her own. Despite her fear, they compelled her to action. She turned from the trees and the west-risen sun. Always in the past, giants had defended the weak, and she would do the same. Something was injured. She had no choice. With tentative steps, she approached the river. In her mind, another memory lived. She heard with her father's ears the shriek of warped magic, felt with his nerves the fire tearing at her heart. The vision was close, as vivid as if she had lived it. Rivulets of sweat ran down her brow. As she reached the high bank, she threw off her pack, freeing her arms for battle. A moan sounded from below. Kneeling, Avalar peered over the edge. Panic slammed her backward before she could think, turned her whole world onto its side. Laying there, her face against raw dirt, she flinched as past and present collided in her mind, her thoughts, for in her head the dead waged war. Instincts clashed and battled, the urge to flee, the urge to protect. Murdered slaves howled from her memories, screamed in protest, one united cry. Human! Avalar groaned, her fingers clenching the dirt beside her head. The cry came again, a high-pitched wail of grief and terror. It came from one lone human's throat, a human untainted by magic, unaware, it seemed, of her fear. She lifted up slowly. Trembling, she rolled to sit with her arms locked round her knees, her face to the river. Please, a soft voice groaned. Help me. Pressing her chin to her knees, Avalar rocked. Fear sharpened the voice. Who's there? Avalar's lungs quivered in her chest. She was a giant, guardian of her world. No slavery or humiliation could take that from her. It was the strength and purpose of her people. It lives still deep in her heart. He was just one human, a human without magic. He needed her. Arms trembling, Avalar crawled again to the bank and looked down. He was small, with spindly arms and legs and a face contorted. Because of his tears, he could not see her, had not, at least not clearly. She could still leave him, abandon him. The memories he conjured were a torment, urging her to run, to flee with all her strength, yet his helplessness stopped her. He lay sprawled on his back, chest heaving. His left arm flopped over icy rocks, his right hand clutching feebly at a jumble of wood, a gnarled stump thrown out by the wild current. Skid marks above his head told her his story. He had slipped from above to ensnare himself in the twisted wood. Now he lay trapped, his left leg pinned under debris. She glanced about her. He was far from any habitation, and alone. No one would ever find him here. "Father!" the human sobbed. He raised his right hand to cover his face. Avalar, watching him, caught the timbre in his voice, the childish quaver in the word he spoke. This explained his size. He was a youth, small even by human standards. She drew herself erect. With quick fingers she loosed her sword. "I hear you," she called down in his language. She saw his head jerk, his face turned toward her. Any lingering doubts she had vanished at his stark look of fear. Deliberately she dropped her sword and knelt. "Fear not," she said. "I am here to succor you if I can. There's no one else." He trembled. His eyes went wide as she turned on her stomach and lowered herself over the edge. Blindly she explored with her foot. The stones beside him were stable beneath her, held in place by layers of mud. She centered her weight and turned. His lips quivered, his brown eyes bulged at the sight of her. With a groan he fought to break free. Avalar crouched to touch his arm. "Peace, little one," she breathed. "I will help, not harm. Where are you injured?" He struggled a moment more, then sagged against the rocks, eyes closed, gasping for air. "My leg," he panted, gripping his knee. "Nothing more?" Suddenly curious, Avalar stroked his small round face. His skin was soft beneath her fingers, smooth like the inside of a shell. He flinched at her touch. She patted back his grimy hair. "I will see you to your home," she told him, "but you must tell me where you hurt." The boy shivered hard. Teeth gritted, he opened his eyes to stare at her. "Just my leg," he said. With his hands he pulled at his limb. My ankle!" Avalar shrugged off her Sunderkhan parka. It was heavy even for her, but its thick fur would warm him. With careful hands she tucked it around the child. Then she sat at his side, bracing her heels against the wood. "How come you're so big?" he asked softly. She smiled despite herself, flicked him a glance as she planted her hands. "How are you so small?" she countered. Then, still grinning, she slammed all her weight and strength into her legs. The stump recoiled as she struck. It leapt from the mud and bounced with a heavy splash into the water. She removed the tangle of roots, tossing them down as well. Then she lifted his leg, cradled it with her hands. He cried out and clutched at her fingers. Avalar, settling back, pillowed his ankle on her thigh. She unlaced his boot, loosened the worn leather flaps. "It hurts," the child gasped, squirming. "Shh, I know." Gently Avalar uncovered the foot. The chilled flesh was livid purple, the skin torn along one side. She felt the bones from the calf down. "You have cracked your ankle," she said. "Mayhap also these toes. But you will mend. How long were you trapped here?" His brown eyes stared. "All night. Father sent me out for wood and a prowler chased me. They've been hunting all around Faranth. They take our livestock." "A prowler?" Avalar blinked at the boy. She knew of the ancient cat-like people, but had no idea the race existed on Thalos. "And you escaped how?" The boy shivered beneath the white fur. His brown eyes gleamed. "I played dead. Prowlers only eat meat that they can kill, you know." "Yes," she said. "It is well you know so much, little human. Your wisdom has sufficed to save you. You were here all night?" Amazed at his hardiness, Avalar stood. She lifted the child, stretched him atop the bank, then scrambled up beside him. Using fragments of bark from the dead tree, she splinted his leg from the knee down. Binding it with scraps of leather she scavenged from her stores. "We need to get you home," Avalar said. She climbed to her feet and strapped on her sword. Then she wriggled the pack over her shoulders and bent, scooping him into her arms. "How far is this for Ranth?" He gestured toward the west. Half a league." The boy chattered with cold until she worried his teeth might break. "I thought I was going to die, but he wanted to play first." "Ah." Avalar started again across the meadow. She knew about prowlers and their bloody idea of play. They were the smaller cousins of the Shirkan raiders up north, the heavy-maned creatures who hunted or butchered for sport, who had exterminated entire species in their frenzied competitions. In the past, her people had driven back the Shirkan fleet, had fought to protect threatened ships or villages, but now, with so few giants left, it fell to others to protect the innocent, others like Pony or the ancient tribes of northern elves. She ground her teeth. She hoped it was true the raiders were now extinct, slain just as they had slaughtered so many. The boy groaned in her arms. Avalar glanced at him in concern. With her free hand she tucked the fur tightly around him as she walked. "Not long now," she told him. Reaching the trees, she shoved her way between their branches. "What are you called?" "Cray." His brown gaze found hers. "You're a giant, aren't you?" "Yes," she answered. She moved at a half-crouch beneath the low boughs. "I am Avalar Mistavir. Do I frighten you?" Closing his eyes, he shook his head. "A lot of my people fear giants, though." "I did too, but you're nice." She smiled. "This is what giants traditionally do. We lend the world our strength and stamina. As important as our magic is, little Cray, it is not our minds and hearts. It is not wholly what we are." He reached with his hand to explore his sore ankle. "How come you're here?" he asked, wincing. Avalar peered through the branches at the nearby mountains, their gleaming white outlines against the sky. Then she met Cray's eyes, his bold curiosity. "It has to do with the sword," she told him softly. "A magical glaive called Nightbringer. It was discovered within the mines, a weapon meant for giants. No one knows its true origin or how it was hidden, as it was. The legendary giant thresher Gavorian friend bonded to it. By doing so, it allowed him to free my people." Gavorian was not a legend back then, though, she corrected herself softly, or even a leader. He was the son of a farmer and just past his youth. Nightbringer. Cray smiled. His eyes stared past her face as if he imagined the sword gleaming in the air behind her head. She nodded and pushed again through the trees. "The black sword. For 400 cycles it has been on display in the treasure hall on Hathra. When I saw it as a child, it sang to me, though no one else heard it. It touched my heart and made me see I needed to come here, to learn to fight, but also—" Snow dropped down her neck. She hunched her shoulders and wished for her parka, but the child needed it more. Even with it, she could see him shiver. "But also?" Cray prompted softly. Smiling, Avalar shoved her way between a tangled cluster of greenberry bushes. "My people need to live as they were meant to," she told him. "I would like to show them that they can." The boy sighed. Glancing down, Avalar wondered at his tenacity. Even a giant would have been harmed by such an ordeal, yet perhaps he suffered more than she realized. His skin was deathly pale, his lips tinged a fatal blue. She jerked to a stop. Voices called out ahead, shouting roughly back and forth. Blades hacked at the frozen underbrush, cutting their way through. Avalar unshouldered her pack and let it drop. Trembling, she grasped her sword's hilt. Cray's eyelids fluttered open as he raised his head. "My father's voice," he murmured. "That's my father." Avalar gasped for breath. She was haunted by visions, memories not her own. A brutal weight pressed against her like the low rocky ceiling of the mines. Kraken barked and whined through the damp darkness. Giants screamed in agony as their own magic turned against them, ripping their bodies inside out. These were her father's memories, her father as a youth. A figure crashed through the trees and froze. Horror spread across his face as his gaze traveled up her frame. Even on the slight hill he stood on, his head barely reached her hip. Cradled in her arms, the boy strained forward, yet Avalar ignored him. Standing poised on the balls of her feet, she snatched out her sword. "Uncle Sharon!" Cray's voice was distant, lost behind memories and fear. Avalar bared her teeth at the human, swinging her sword to cleave the air between herself and this new threat. Growling, she widened her strokes as 4 more humans appeared to surround her. All were gaunt, starving beneath their furs. Circling her warily, they brandished sticks and machetes at her stomach and legs. Avalar slapped away their puny threats with the disdainful flat of her massive blade, a broadsword almost as long as they were. Only the boy restrained her. He clutched at her arm. "Do not do this," his eyes begged. "This is my father, my people." Air whistled through her teeth. Cradling the boy in the crook of her arm, she bent over and gestured at the men with her sword. "Back away," she snarled. Hues of red blood flashed across her sight, her quickened blood screaming for battle. "Do it, and I will give you this child. Do it not!" Her control shattered and she howled, "Back away!" The man in front stumbled backward, his expression wide with dismay. His face had a haunted look beneath his dirty black beard. Lines of worry creased his brow and cut furrows down his sunken cheeks. "Cray?" He blinked away sweat from his eyes. "What has she done to you?" "Nothing, father." Cray yelled the words over the angry cries of the men. "She saved my life. A prowler nearly got me." The man met Avalar's glare. As he hesitated, Avalar read his expression, glimpsing behind his eyes the father he was, a father not unlike her own, a father who had seen too much. She watched him wave the others back. They protested loudly, arguing from all sides in their rough Thalusian tongue. Avalar, concentrating on the one she knew to be Cray's father, fought to understand their words. As her quickened blood began to cool, awareness dawned. These humans were afraid of her. No, not afraid, terrified. Just as she did, they reacted wholly on instinct, with the sheer desperation of cornered prey. Avalar shook her head. She glanced down at the child in her arms. This fear was not inspired by giants, she realized. She doubted any of them had seen her kind before. These humans seemed more like the Kraken dogs from the slave mines, beasts who would snap at anything after being kicked too much. Avalar crouched slowly to lay the child down. With deft fingers, she freed him from her cloak. Meeting the father's stare, a man whose eyes were now nearly level with her own, Avalar reached for her pack. All around her the little machetes and sticks jutted close, and she froze, the leather ties falling limply from her hand. "Please," she breathed. She spoke in their language. For the first time in her life, she was grateful for her father's lessons. "You are starving. I give you food." The men went very still as she slowly opened her pack. She sensed their hungry eyes tracking her every move. "Your son was trapped and injured, and I succored him." She spoke as softly and slowly as she could. "Now I wish to give you my aid, though you deserve it not. For the way of my people does not require that you deserve. Have the prowlers taken so much? How many of you have perished?" Cray's father, the curve of his machete angled upward at her head, gestured behind him. "Sharon, my brother, take Cray home. Do it now." In silence, Avalar watched another of the men come forward at a crouch to scoop up the boy. She allowed it, winking at Cray before the man hastened the child from her sight. Then she shook open her pack and drew forth a sealed sphere. It was a reef bulb, one filled with a kind of dried fish she'd grown tired of. Avalar placed it on the ground before her, then with her toe rolled it toward Cray's father. "Take this," she told the men softly. "It's disgusting and smelly, but it will give you strength until I bring more. Before I continue on my journey, I will hunt for you." Slowly the humans before her lowered their weapons, and Avalar smiled. "Prowlers only hunt within their territory," she told them. "It seems they have claimed your land. I am not wise, but I say you would do well to abandon your homes and settle elsewhere." She backstepped slowly as they watched, crouching low into shadow and out of their sight among the trees. So intent was she on keeping her sword forward, her gaze forward, even after she had put several rows of trees between herself and the scrawny humans, she failed at first to notice how the birds had gone silent. The quick sounds of breathing that was not her own alerted her finally, and she spotted the dark smudge of a figure crouched beneath a low-hanging branch to her right. Avalar stopped still and turned toward it. "Are you hunting the human?" she asked. "Should I be hunting you?" "Fish!" The creature hissed the word. "Your hands reek of it. Give me." Avalar glowered at the half-seen figure. Despite its small stature, she felt a tingle of fear quicken her blood. "You are rude," she told it softly. "Why should I give anything to you?" "I natter hunt humans," came the sibilant voice. "Fish better." It paused, and Avalar heard a quick series of grunting breaths. "Please." "Show yourself," said Avalar. "Let me see you first." The branches bobbed when the creature moved, stalking its way toward her. Avalar blinked as the figure stepped fully into her view. It was lithe and lean, moving like rays of sunlight flickering through autumn trees. Stunned by its unexpected beauty, Avalar gasped. The creature was naked, its flat, hard muscles sliding beneath a tawny red coat that changed to dapple gray along its shoulders and flanks. Stripes of midnight swept from its furry black paws to its calves and forearms. It was small, half the size of a human, its limbs designed for running on all fours. Ears pricked forward atop its wide domed head, eyes glinted bright beside the thin white blaze down the center of its face. The blunt muzzle lifted, jaws parted into a needle-toothed smile. "She-prowler," the creature purred. "Beautiful, yes. You like. I hear breath fast from you." Peering into eyes like liquid giltstone, Avalar nodded. "You are beautiful," Avalar told her. "What is your name?" A raspy thrumming came from the prowler's throat. "I Shetra. I not a hurt giant, not a hurt life of world." "Good," Avalar told her. "I am sword-trained by Grevelin Mistivir. No giant knows battle so well as he." The cat-like creature lashed her rust-colored tail. "I not her match for giant." "Fish?" she asked again. Avalar snorted. Keeping her blade out for the prowler to see, she again shrugged her pack from her shoulders. Her last reef bulb landed with a soft crunch at the prowler's feet, but then on impulse Avalar leaned forward with her sword, keeping the creature from it. "Promise," she said in a low, stern voice. "None of your people will hunt these humans any more. If they do, I will know. We giants have a way of knowing things. We prevented your raider cousins in the north. If we must, we will prevent you." Shetra humphed, her breath puffing out her cheeks in a fast, angry rhythm. "Prowler not to hunt. No prowler hunt. Bad human take human meat, not a prowler." "You lie," Avalar said softly. "A child was hunted last night by a prowler. Shem." Shetra opened her jaws in a toothy yawn of disgust. "Bad male. Outsider. Hurt here." With a splayed-toothed paw, she tapped her head. "Not a good." Avalar drew back her sword, surrendering her last bulb. "Then I will kill this Shem if I find him," she told the prowler. If you have any love for him at all, warn him to leave this land at once." With a snort, Shetra sprang forward and fastened her jaws on the glistening spear. A second great leap took her sailing over the branches of the trees and away from Abelar's sight. Abelar stood with her head cocked, her gaze fixed on nothing but the turmoil of her thoughts. Something sinister preyed on the town Pharanth, feeding on its people. From the first she had blamed her uneasiness on Thalys, on the fact she walked where slavers once lived. But this was different. Old magic was in motion, the lifeblood of her world, only now it worked to destroy the humans themselves. She ground her teeth, forcing her thoughts to more immediate things, like hunting for the humans and replenishing her stores. With a low curse, she snatched up her pack and stared again toward the river. "I will follow your banks to Crinith Lake," she told it, "and there at last we will part, for I march to Tyrdan." She scowled and shook her head. Pony had mentioned a gap between the mountains, but right now, from where she stood, it seemed unlikely that the line of Snarltooth would ever end.